Whenever we get to talking about Plato's core teachings, the discussion inevitably comes around to virtue. But there's a lot of confusion as to what Plato even means by virtue, what his ideal is. There appears, at least on the surface, to be some contradiction in the way virtue is presented from one dialogue to the next. Is the goal a separation of soul from body, such as in the Phaedo, or is it to act in the world, such as in the Republic? How do we mesh these different images together? Well, in this video, I'm going to address these questions. First, though, we need a basic notion of what virtue is. The Greek word is arete, which roughly translates as virtue. More accurately, though, it is excellence. It is the excellence of the soul in its healthiest state. We usually think of philosophy as having the goal of gaining wisdom. Another way to think about it is that we are seeking health, the health of the soul. Plato famously presented virtue as being a unity of four virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. If you are not familiar with these, you can click on this video here. But briefly, wisdom is the virtue of the reasoning part of the soul. It is the part that is focused through philosophy on the nature of reality. Courage is often associated with willpower. It is what keeps the soul focused on what is good and true, not letting the soul get distracted by pleasures or intimidated by fears. And so it is guided by wisdom. And then there is temperance, which is quite possibly the most misunderstood of all the virtues. This is not about denying your emotions or repressing your desires. It is a state of mind in which the desires naturally fall in line with what is good and beautiful. To the degree that we are able to be guided by the wisdom-loving part of the soul, we recognize what is truly good, and so our desires will flow accordingly. Temperance, then, is also guided by wisdom, and further, it is aided by courage. Lastly, there is justice. Justice is the foundation for all the virtues, and it is what ties all of them together into a harmonious unity, ensuring that each aspect of the soul is carrying out its proper role. The result in the soul that has achieved excellence is a person of single-minded adherence to truth. Before this time, we find ourselves fractured, pursuing conflicting desires and pulled in every which way. And so this is the basic summary of the virtues. However, in addition to thinking about the excellence of the soul in this fourfold way, we can also talk about the development of this excellence in stages. What I am going to present in this video is the most common scheme, but you may have seen a different number of stages or different names for some of these stages. At the lowest stage are the physical virtues. This is dealing purely with basic physical needs of the self as a body, the virtue of an animal or the irrational part of the human soul. Plato doesn't focus here beyond acknowledging that some people do function in this way. So I'll move on to the next level. This is of the ethical virtues. This is the level that we gain from our families and our social customs. In the laws, Plato called this education. I term the goodness that first comes to children education. When pleasure and love and pain and hatred spring up rightly in the souls of those who are unable as yet to grasp a rational account. And when, After grasping the rational account, they consent thereunto through having been rightly trained in fitting practices. This consent, viewed as a whole, is goodness, while the part of it that is rightly trained in respect of pleasures and pains, so as to hate what ought to be hated right from the beginning up to the very end, and to love what ought to be loved. If you were to mark this part off in your definition and call it education, you would be giving it, in my opinion, its right name. A person with ethical virtue has developed a sense of good judgment, perhaps, but there is a higher level of virtue that we as social creatures can develop. And this is generally called political virtue. Ethical virtue, in contrast, might be thought of as common sense. And while common sense is not at all common, it does not really require applying the rational part of the soul, the higher faculties. It is rooted largely in right opinion. Political virtue is different. Political virtue is about utilizing the rational part of the soul to move from right opinion to a genuine understanding of what is good and true and why. Philosophers spend much of our effort here, gaining an understanding of reality itself through the study of metaphysics. We turn these ideas around in our soul and see what effect they have on us. The name political virtue can be misleading. This stage of virtue is not specifically about politics, but about the application of virtue at the social level. And likewise, the dialogue Republic, although it is often characterized as a political dialogue, actually focuses on the education of the soul at this level of political virtue. Plato writes in Republic that when the philosopher gains sufficient understanding to unite all the parts of the soul, and this unity he calls justice, and he made of himself a unit, one man instead of many, self-controlled and in unison, he should then, and then only, turn to practice if he find aught to do, either in the getting of wealth or the tendance of the body, or it may be in political action or private business. In all such doings, believing and naming the just and honorable action to be that which preserves and helps to produce this condition of soul. And wisdom is what he names the science that presides over such conduct. Many students of philosophy never go beyond this, and to reach this level of excellence is quite an impressive achievement. We can push on, though, to an even loftier goal. This higher goal is the mastery of the cathartic virtues. This is pursued by drawing the energies of the rational soul away from the body, so as to study reality itself, freed from the physical senses. If we do get a bit of leisure and turn to philosophy, the body is constantly breaking in upon our studies and disturbing us with noise and confusion, so that it prevents our beholding the truth. And in fact, we perceive that, if we are ever to know anything absolutely, we must be free from the body and must behold the actual realities with the eye of the soul alone. Socrates calls this separation a purification. And does not the purification consist in this, which has been mentioned long ago in our discourse, in separating, so far as possible, the soul from the body, and teaching the soul the habit of collecting and bringing itself together from all parts of the body, and living, so far as it can, both now and hereafter, alone by itself, freed from the body as from fetters? Few go beyond this level of excellence to the next stage, the theoretic virtues. Here we are talking about virtue as a truly contemplative state of mind. It is the state of mind of one who is illuminated by divine intellect. We should make all speed to take flight from this world to the other, and that means becoming like the divine so far as we can. And that again is to become righteous with the help of wisdom. Plato also wrote, "In the divine there is no shadow of unrighteousness, only the perfection of righteousness. And nothing is more like the divine than any one of us who becomes as righteous as possible. It is here that a man shows his true spirit and power, or lack of spirit and nothingness. For to know this is wisdom and excellence of the genuine sort. Not to know it is to be manifestly blind and base." For many Platonists, the ranking of the stages of virtue ends here as the highest excellence of the soul. How would you possibly go beyond becoming as like the divine as is humanly possible? But the Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus saw the reaches of human ability stretching even beyond the theoretic virtues. The 19th century translator and Platonist Thomas Taylor explains it this way. According to Plotinus, there is also another gradation of the virtues besides these. He calls it the paradigmatic. For as our eye, when it is first illuminated by the solar light, is different from that which illuminates, as being illuminated, but afterwards is in a certain respect united and conjoined with it, and becomes, as it were, solar form. So also our soul at first indeed is illuminated by intellect, and it energizes according to the theoretic virtues, but afterwards becomes, as it were, that which is illuminated, and energizes uniformly according to the paradigmatic virtues. Consider this quote from the Neoplatonic philosopher Damascus. "We attempt to look at the sun for the first time, and when we are far away at least, we succeed. But the closer we approach, the less we see it. And at last we see neither the sun nor other things, since we have completely become the light itself, instead of an enlightened eye." Perhaps this helps explain the paradox of the wise Socrates claiming to know nothing. Well, I would argue that Plato hinted at this level of excellence, using Socrates himself as the paradigm of the paradigmatic virtues. And so now I am going to turn to the Symposium, where Alcibiades describes Socrates as a magical, godlike figure. "He is likest to the Silenus figures that sit in the statuary shops. Those, I mean, which our craftsmen make with pipes and flutes in their hands. When their two halves are pulled open, they are found to contain images of the gods." Alcibiades went on to describe Socrates as mastering all four virtues to a nearly superhuman degree. Now, much attention has been given to Socrates' ability to walk barefoot in frozen snow or to stand all night in contemplation. Such feats certainly do point to this level of purification. I want to focus, though, on the four virtues specifically. And I further suggest that he resembles the satyr Marsyas. "Are you not a piper, Socrates?" "Why, yes, and a far more marvelous one than the satyr. His lips, indeed, had power to entrance mankind by means of instruments. You differ from him in one point only. that you produce the same effect with simple prose, unaided by instruments. And the words that Socrates used to entrance mankind were words of wisdom. For he compels me to admit that, sorely deficient as I am, I neglect myself while I attend to the affairs of Athens. In addition to wisdom, Socrates also displayed great courage in battle, showing greater composure than General Laucus himself. He carried himself as one who knows the body to be but a temporary vehicle, and it is not who or what he truly is. The troops were in utter disorder, and he was retreating along with Laucus when I chanced to come up with them. And I noticed first how far he outdid Laucus in collectedness, turning a calm sidelong look on friend and foe alike, and convincing anyone, even from afar, that whoever cares to touch this person will find he can put up a stout enough defense. The result was that both he and his comrade got away unscathed. For as a rule, people will not lay a finger on those who show this disposition in war. It is men flying in headlong rout that they pursue. Again, comparing Socrates to the Silenus figure, Alcibiades describes Socrates' great temperance, which is sobriety in this quote, or sophrosyne in Greek. It is an outward casing he wears, similarly to the sculptured Silenus. But if you opened his inside, you can't not imagine how full he is of sobriety. I tell you, all the beauty a man may have is nothing to him. He despises it more than any of you can believe. Nor does wealth attract him, nor any sort of honor that is the envied prize of the crowd. All these possessions he counts as nothing of worth. As for the justice of one who has reached true excellence, Alcibiades describes Socrates in this way. If you chose to listen to Socrates' discourses, you would feel them at first to be quite ridiculous. On the outside, they are clothed with such absurd words and phrases, all, of course, the hide of a mocking satyr. His talk is of pack-asses, smiths, cobblers, and tanners, and he seems always to be using the same terms for the same things, so that anyone inexpert and thoughtless might laugh his speeches to scorn. But when these are opened, and you obtain a fresh view of them by getting inside, first of all, you will discover that they are the only speeches which have any sense in them. And secondly, that none are so divine, so rich in images of virtue, so largely, nay, completely, intent on all things proper for the study of such as would attain both grace and worth. So by becoming unified and of one mind, always connected to the divine intellect, Socrates proved himself to be the quintessential teacher. He inspired all who engaged with him with sincerity to ponder their own soul, and they were benefited from that interaction. And this is justice. And so we can see Platonism as a journey through the virtues, gradually nurturing the excellence of the soul. From the physical and ethical virtues of our society to the political virtues that allow us to act in society with true excellence. Those who dare to proceed further reach the Cathartic virtues, for example, of the Phaedo, and then there's the Theoretic virtues as a contemplative state of mind. From here are the Paradigmatic virtues embodied in the divine figure of Socrates. We can even go a step further and match each of these stages to the metaphysical realm that it most closely aligns with. And so we see here that we can talk of virtue in 6 levels. And we also understand virtue in a fourfold way. So do we have 4 virtues or 24? Well, the short answer is no. We don't have 4 or 24. How many do we have? 1. The 4 virtues, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, are simply 4 aspects of that one excellence of the soul, the state of mind of someone who has cleared away false belief and realized the true nature of reality. And so it's a further misconception then to multiply those 4 sixfold and conclude that there are 24 virtues, or that the stages, in other words, are separate and distinct from one another. The stages simply give us a way to gauge the maturing progression of the one excellence of the soul. And this is ultimately the goal of the quest, to know thyself. Well, if you like this kind of content, please give it a like, and also let me know in the comments section what other topics you might like me to cover.